This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brooks Jensen, Anacortes, Washington. Master and Man by Leo Tolstoy. Section 2. The good little cob moved the sledge rapidly along with a light creaking of the runners as he trotted a round pace over the well-beaten, frozen piece of road leading to the village. " Hullo! What have you jumped up for? " cried Vasili, suddenly, clearly enjoying the fact that an unauthorized passenger was trying to perch himself upon the runners behind. " Give me the whip, Nikita," he interjected. " I'll thrash you, you young rascal. Run along home to your mother." The boy jumped off. Brownie broke into a gallop, but soon changed to a trot again. Kresti, where Vasili lived, was a hamlet of 6 houses only, and when they had got beyond the blacksmith's hut at the end, they at once perceived that the wind was much stronger than they had thought it to be, and that the road ahead was almost invisible. The track of the sledge became snowed over almost as fast as made, and only the fact that the road was a little higher than the ground on either side of it rendered it at all distinguishable. The snow was whirling over the countryside and blotting out the horizon, while the Telyatinsky forest, generally clearly visible, now showed only as a dark mass looming at intervals through the snow dust. The wind was blowing from the left, and kept turning Brownie's mane over his thick, fat neck and blowing his feathery tail, bound at the top in a plain knot, across his flank. Owing to the wind, too, Nikita's tall coat-collar, where he sat on the weather side of the sledge, kept pressing itself tightly against his cheeks and nose. " The cob can't get up too much of a pace today. There's too much snow on the ground," said Vasili, who prided himself on the excellence of his steed. "Once I drove him to Pashutino in half an hour." " What did you say? " asked Nikita, whose tall coat-collar had prevented him from hearing what was said. " I said that I have driven to Pashutino in half an hour," bawled Vasili. " That's something to boast of, indeed. He's a good animal, if there ever was one," commented Nikita, after which they kept silent for a while. Vasili, however, was inclined to be talkative. " What do you think? I told your wife the other day not to let her cooper drink all the tea," he bawled once more in the firm conviction that Nikita must be feeling flattered at being talked to by such an important and highly educated man as himself, as well as so greatly taken with his own joke about the cooper that it never entered into his head that the topic might be distasteful to Nikita. However, the latter had once more failed to catch his master's words for the violence of the wind, so Vasili repeated his pleasantry at the very top of his educated voice. " God be with her, Vasili Andreyevich," returned Nikita when he understood. " I never interfere with their affairs. She has given me little cause for blame, and, so long as she treats the lad well, I merely say, God be with her." " Well, well," said Vasili, and changed the subject. " Are you going to buy a horse in the spring? " he continued. " I only wish I could," replied Nikita, as he turned his coat-collar back a little and leant over towards his master. The new topic interested him, and he wanted to catch every word. " My little lad is fast growing up and ought to learn to plough, but I have squandered all my money." " Well, if you'll take the low-rumped nag off my hands, I won't ask you much for it," said Vasili, whose spirits were rising, and who therefore recurred instinctively to his ruling passion, the passion which absorbed his whole faculties, namely, the pursuit of bargains. " I would rather you lent me 15 roubles and let me go and buy one in the horse market," answered Nikita, knowing full well that the low-rumped nag which Vasili was asking him to buy was worth no more than 7 roubles at the outside, but that as soon as ever Vasili had handed him over the animal he would swear that it was worth at least 25, and therefore retain about half a year's wages to cover the amount. " The horse is a splendid one," went on Vasili in his precise, business-like tones. " I want to do you a service as well as myself. Honestly now, Brekhunov would never do any man a bad turn. I would rather be out of pocket myself than see others so. Yes, on my honour. The horse is a magnificent one." " I am sure of it," said Nikita with a sigh. Then, finding it useless to try and listen further, he turned up his coat-collar again, and his face and ear became covered in a twinkling. For about half an hour they drove in silence. The wind kept getting down on Nikita's legs and through a hole in his mitten, but he hunched his shoulders and breathed into the coat-collar muffled over his mouth, so that he did not feel the cold very much at all. " What do you think? Shall we go round by Karamishevo or straight on? " asked Vasily presently. The road by way of Karamishevo was the longer and the rougher one, yet, on the other hand, it was clearly defined by posts on either side. The road straight on was a good deal nearer, but used by few travellers, as well as either altogether devoid of posts or marked only by small ones, which would now be almost drifted over. Nikita debated matters for a moment. " The road by Karamishevo is longer than the other one, but a good deal the easier to drive over," he decided at length. " Yet if we go straight on," pursued Vasily, who was inclined towards the route he named, " we have only to get into the hollow, and then we can't possibly lose our way. It will be splendid going through the forest." " As you wish," said Nikita, and turned up his coat-collar again. Accordingly, Vasily had his way, and after driving about half a verst further on, turned to the left where a tall young oak tree stood. Here the translator inserts a footnote that a verst is about 2/3 of an English mile. Its branches and the few dead leaves which still clung to them were being madly dashed about by the wind, which, after the turning, met the travellers almost full in the face. Light snow began to fall, and Vasily tightened the reins, puffed out his cheeks, and let the breath escape slowly from under his moustache, while Nikita dozed. They had driven like this in silence for about 10 minutes when Vasily gave an exclamation. " What is it? " asked Nikita, opening his eyes. Vasily returned no answer, but twisted himself round to look back. Then he gazed ahead. The cob was still trotting along, his flanks steaming with sweat. " What is it? " asked Nikita again. " What is it, do you say? " cried Vasily in an angry mimicry of the question. " Why, only that I can't see any posts now. We must be off the road." " Wait a minute, then, while I go and look for it," said Nikita, as he leapt lightly from the sledge, and, taking the whip from beneath the straw, went ahead and towards the left, the side on which he had been sitting. The snow had not been very deep that year, so that, as yet, the road had been easily passable the whole way along, but here there were patches where it reached knee-high and smothered Nikita's boot-tops. He kept on trying the ground, both with his feet and the whip, as he walked along, yet the road had vanished. " Well? " said Vasily when Nikita returned to the sledge. " No road on this side," answered Nikita. " I must try the other." " There seems to be something dark showing ahead," remarked Vasily. " Go and see what it is." Nikita did so, and found it to be only a spot where the naked sprouts of some winter corn, sown on a piece of black earth, were making a dark patch on the snow as they waved before the wind. Nikita circled round to the right, and then returned to the sledge again, beating the snow from his khalat and boots, and remounted. " We must go to the right," he said with decision. " The wind was on our left a moment ago, but now it is straight in our faces. Yes, to the right. Yes, to the right," he concluded with an air of conviction. Vasily just managed to catch what he said, and turned the cob in the direction indicated. Yet no road revealed itself there, although they went on for a considerable time. Meanwhile the wind showed no signs of dropping, and the snow continued. " Well, we are altogether lost now, Vasili Andreyevich," observed Nikita, suddenly, and half as though he were pleased at the fact. " What is this, though? " he went on, pointing to a blackened potato-top which was projecting above the snow. Vasily at once stopped the cob, which was now sweating heavily and moving its stout flanks with difficulty. " Yes, what is it? " he echoed. " It means that we are on the Zakharovek estate. That is where we have got to." Surely not! Exclaimed Vasily. Yes, it is as I say, insisted Nikita. You can tell, too, by the sound of the sledge runners that we are driving over a potato field. Look at the bits of potato tops which they have dragged off. Yes, these are the Zakharovek market gardens. — A fine place to get landed in, said Vasily. Well, what is to be done now? — We must keep going to the right, and we shall be sure to come out somewhere or other, answered Nikita. If we don't actually strike Zakharovek, we shall at all events come across some tenant's farm. Vasily assented and drove the cob forward in the direction Nikita had advised. They proceeded thus for a considerable time, now coming upon bare grass, now upon rough patches of frozen ground over which the sledge went grating loudly. Then, again, they would find themselves passing over stubble of winter or spring corn, with the dead straws or sticks of weeds projecting above the snow and waving madly before the wind. More than once they found themselves labouring through deep, level, pure white drifts, with nothing whatever showing above the top. All the while the snowfall continued, and the snow dust whirled about the ground. The cob was evidently failing now, for his flanks were white and steaming with sweat. He proceeded only at a foot's pace. Suddenly he stumbled, and then plunged forward in some ditch or gully. Vasily was for pulling up, but Nikita shouted to him, " Why stop? Go on, go on! We must get him out of this. Now then, my beauty, now then, my pet," he went on to the cob encouragingly as he leapt from the sledge, only to stick fast in the ditch himself. However, the cob extricated himself presently and scrambled back onto the frozen ridge which lined the bank. Evidently it was a ditch dug out by hand. " Where are we now? " queried Vasily. " We must find that out," answered Nikita. " Let us push on a bit, and we shall arrive somewhere." " Isn't that the Goviatchkinsky forest, surely? " said his master presently, pointing to something black looming in the snow ahead. " It may be. We'd better push on and find out," rejoined Nikita. As a matter of fact, he had already distinguished the oblong patches of some withered vine leaves showing against the blackness of the object in question, and knew, therefore, that it was more likely to be a habitation of some kind than a forest. Yet he hesitated to speak before he knew for certain. Sure enough, they had not proceeded more than 20 yards beyond the ditch when trees showed up clearly before them and some melancholy sound became audible. Nikita had guessed rightly. It was not a forest they had come to, but a row of tall vines, and a few withered leaves still quivering upon them. Evidently they marked the trench of a threshing floor. Just as the travellers had almost reached these vines, and could tell that the melancholy sound arose from the wind sweeping through their rustling leaves, the cob took a sudden plunge upward with his forehoofs, pulled up his hindquarters after them, turned to the left, and went on with the snow no longer reaching to his knees. It was the road again. " Now we have reached it! " exclaimed Nikita. " But the Lord only knows where." The cob, however, never faltered, but went straight ahead with the snow-swept road until, just as they had covered about 100 yards, there uprose before them the rectangular outlines of a wattled barn, with its roof piled up with snow and the snow dust blowing from it in clouds. Passing the barn, the road wound back into the wind a little, and they found themselves in a snowdrift. A short way further on could be seen an opening between two buildings, so that it was clear that the road lay through the snowdrift, and that the latter must be surmounted. Sure enough, they had no sooner accomplished this than they found themselves in a village street, in the nearest courtyard of which some frozen linen was hanging from a line and rustling distractedly in the wind. It comprised 2 shirts, one of them white and the other one red, a pair of drawers, some leggings, and a petticoat, of which the white shirt was particularly abandoned in its antics as it waved its sleeves before the wind. " Ugh, the lazy woman, though I'm sorry to have to say it of her," said Nikita with a glance at the waving shirts. " To think of not getting one's linen ready for the festival." This ends Section 2.